Good afternoon. So today I'm a guest of Professor Albertini, who is going to answer a couple of our questions. Professor Albertini is a great scholar. Her reputation precedes her, and her work is basically known around the world, and we are very deeply grateful for this invitation. On behalf of University of Nascendi, I would like to thank you for this invitation. Professor Albertini, could you tell us a little bit more about your process of Nascendi, your process of creation, your academic development from Basel, from Munich to Hawaii, where you've been, where you're at the moment, and where you're heading to in your academic development?
Any questions? Well, I may say that in everything I did that turned out to be fruitful academically speaking, and also for my scholarly work, I was always driven by curiosity. So when I ended my studies in Basel with a master's degree, I felt I needed to go somewhere else, test my ideas with different professors. It was not easy to leave Basel. It was cozy, but I ended up going to Munich. Compared to Basel, definitely a big city, a very different intellectual climate, much rougher than Basel, but it was a good thing. We grow with the difficulties that we encounter, if we manage to overcome them, of course. But I think I did find a way, because again, I was looking for new ideas, new stimulations. And to my greatest surprise, I found out when I went to Munich that there was an entire philosophical period that I had never heard of. Because you see, you get your master's degree in philosophy and you kind of know that you know very little, but you still think that you have an overview. So the one period nobody had ever mentioned to me in my undergraduate years was the Renaissance. Everybody knows about it as a period of art, great names being Leonardo and Michelangelo and Raphael and so forth. But philosophically speaking, nobody had really made a case for that being a different period. The Middle Ages is one period, rationalism is a period in philosophy, but nobody said that the Renaissance was one too. So, to my delight, there was an entire institute dedicated to Renaissance philosophy and to the history of ideas. That was the official name of that institute. And I remember vividly, there was this one seminar that I enrolled in, and it said something about aesthetics in Thomas Aquinas and Marsilio Ficino. I thought, where did I got something about Thomas Aquinas? Ficino? Not a clue, but I'll figure it out.
Sure.
And sure enough, Marsilio Ficino became the philosopher on whom I worked for my dissertation.
Amazing.
So that was one, that was one itinerary. And as I was about to finish my dissertation, let's say 6 months before I was going to submit, I luckily remembered how I felt after I finished my master exams, which is that I fell into a deep hole. And you see, you work so hard for months and months and months, and then one day you wake up and you don't know what to do with your life. So I thought, I don't want that to happen to me again. So I applied for a summer fellowship at the UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. There was, and there still is, this amazing Institute for Medieval and Renaissance Studies. The director was also a Ficino specialist. And I was hoping that my expertise might, find his attention, and it did. And so 2 days, I think, after my last PhD exams, I was already on the plane going to Los Angeles.
Amazing.
And so basically, there was always something driving me, and always something that I wanted to try out. And it takes, of course, also some good luck, when things do turn out
Amazing.
well.
Professor Albertini, I've heard that there is something in particular which actually helped you in your academic career. I've heard that you speak how many? 7 foreign languages? We have a lot of young people among our readers and our viewers. What would you say to them? Should they learn languages, or should they just stick to one?
They should definitely learn as many languages as they can. I tell that my students too, especially the graduate students. For one thing, they need to tap into the scholarly literature of many nations. Let's say you happen to be an American or you're British, and if all you read is English, well, you're going to miss some scholarship that was written in French and German and Italian and Spanish and so many more languages. Obviously, there is a limit right, to how many languages one could learn, but I would say 3 to 4 modern European languages is really should be a requirement. And then, of course, if you are interested in non-European traditions, then of course you'll add some more languages from other continents. So there is the benefit for your scholarly work, but it's also an amazing thing to have when you travel, when you meet people, when you network. My name is Albertini, definitely Italian sounding, so I find that Italians relate to me, but it turns out that on the island of Corsica, which is part of France, there is also Albertini, so French people tend to think, oh, I must be from Corsica. Switzerland, of course, my native country, has that family name, and so you see, you kind of like blend more easily, and it makes life so much more pleasant.
Amazing. So we have language, we have location. How about the people? Who was your mentor who inspired you in all of these places? Who pushed you forward?
That's a good question, really. I like to say that what was really driving me from a very early age is intellectual curiosity and an incredible desire to understand, a desire for clarity. Much later, when I started reading Descartes, and he has this criteria, right, of clarity and distinction, it made sense to me instantly. I could just see how that is important if you are going to be a philosopher. So, really, the search for clarity was a driving force. But then, naturally, I did also have excellent teachers. My first teacher in philosophy, his name was Hans-Jörg Salmoni. My first teacher in philosophy was Hans-Jörg Salmoni. He was a Holocaust escapee, so it means he was not put into an extermination camp, but he was arrested, managed to escape, came to Switzerland, or rather went to Switzerland. And what I learned from him is that there is no division between what you work on scholarly, philosophically, and how you live. There's a perfect blend between these two. In his case, it had something to do with his autobiography, of course, but also with the fact that he was Karl Jasper's last assistant and exposed to existential philosophy. So for my undergraduate years, there was a lot of Karl Jaspers involved in my studies. I didn't pursue it later on, but it definitely left a mark on me and on my work. So in Munich, I had this extraordinary teacher who, academically speaking, was exceptional. He is the one who introduced me to Renaissance philosophy. His name was Stefan Otto. Not a good mentor, but nevertheless, someone who was extremely knowledgeable. And I must really, admit that he is the one who got me into this new field.
Sure. When you basically when we read some of your work, like Problems of Conveying Thought and the World in a Metaphysics of Simplicity, Intellectual History of its Methods, at first, to majority of population, it might not come across, the title might not come across as something which they can relate to. How would you put it across to our viewers or our readers? Could you explain it as if you were explaining it to the child, what this work actually conveys?
You're referring to my dissertation, and indeed, like many dissertation titles, mine too is rather heavy. And I would certainly not consider that title today.
Sure.
But back then, it seemed like the right thing to do.
And it was, for sure.
Well, you see, so this had to do with the metaphysics of Massimo Ficino. He was the first person in Europe who had read all of Plato. We're talking post-ancient Greek period. And not only had he read all of Plato's works, but he translated everything from Greek into Latin and wrote substantial commentaries on many of the Platonic dialogues. Now, although he claimed that he was just elaborating on Plato, he did develop his own philosophy.
Sure.
And something that caught my attention was the way how he addressed the functions of the intellect and the will. So intellect and will. He actually inherited the question from the Middle Ages. Major names, Thomas Aquinas, Bonaventure, had dealt with the supremacy either of the intellect or the will. Thomas Aquinas and the rest of the Dominicans opted for the intellect being superior. The Franciscans, of course, did the opposite because these two schools of thought could never agree, and the Franciscans said no, the will was superior. And so what was entailed is that the will is correlated with love. And the ultimate object, of course, is God. So the Franciscans were convinced it is the will that is the more important power in human beings. Now, Thomas Aquinas did say, well, yes, if God is the object of knowledge, the intellect fails. The will carry you further. So that's a situation that Ficino had inherited. But he did something marvelous. So Ficino came up with a wonderful solution. Being truly a man of the Renaissance period, he was not interested in opposites remaining opposites. For him, like for all the major philosophers in that period, opposites are concepts. And the human mind is capable of finding a mediation between extremes. So he did the same, he applied the same concept to intellect and will. So rather than thinking of, one must be superior to the other, he says, no, I have to figure out how these two actually work together. So they are correlatives for Massimo Ficino. The difference is the intellect draws in the world into the mind. And with that changes the world. It means the intellect impresses its own understanding onto the physical world. And the will is the power that goes out and that is driven by love towards this entire physical world around us. And this is so beautiful, right? I mean, this is really how a Renaissance person used to think, right? The material world is not problematic, it is not dark, it is not sinful. The will is in us there to go and try to grab it. So in every act of the mind, the intellect draws in, the will goes out. And so there is this dynamical relationships between these two components of the mind. And where they collaborate is where we understand something of the world. And just to finish up on this thought, he reinterpreted the famous lambda figure that was developed in the later Platonic tradition. And so he has the ratios, the number ratios, which are musical consonances. So the ratio between the intellect and the will is 1 to 2. It's very beautiful. So it means they are harmonious. Yeah? So we need them both.
So are you using this Renaissance harmoniousness to basically explore different aspects of philosophy? Is Renaissance useful to your other pursuits?
Love it. Love the question. I do find that I am looking at opposites in a different way, whether I read Hegel, whether I read contemporary Arab philosophy. I find it easier to discover whether the post-Renaissance philosopher or the philosopher from a very different tradition and culture is possibly also thinking about mediating between opposites. So it's an incredible training to know that in the Renaissance there was something that they called the art of opposites, and it was all about reconciling and mediating.
Okay, so I have something the question which might actually reconcile to different dimensions of one year. This year, 2019, will commemorate the 80th anniversary of the outbreak of the Second World War, and I suppose that the global media would frame the whole debate about 1939 in one way. But there was something happening in 1939 in Hawaii which not everyone is aware. Could you introduce us to things which happens in this part of the world. Could you tell us more about the genesis of East-West philosophical conferences?
Right. So, amazingly, Hawaii, I often refer to it as a rock in the Pacific, and I'm doing it in a loving way. I don't mean at all to, diminish the place. But still, this tiny place, in the Pacific Ocean, was lucky to have a group of people at the University of Hawaii to think about doing philosophy in a very different way. And so what they realized, and one of the people involved in this was Charles Moore. He was the first chair of the philosophy department at the University of Hawaii. Is that not much attention is being given to non-European philosophical traditions.
Sure.
People knew, of course, let's say about Taoism or Confucianism, but that was dealt with in departments of sinology. There were specialists of Indian philosophy, but typically the people who were knowledgeable in that field were coming from linguistics. They were specialists of Sanskrit as well, and I could go on with many more traditions. So the idea came up to invite philosophers from different traditions, from China, from Japan. They seem to be around the corner when you live in Hawaii. And indeed, they had a mini conference, just a few participants. And then they understood together that it was a worthy endeavor. Now, it is true, back then, in 1939, they thought they could find something like universals. But, every field may start with a touch of naivete. And maybe that's good, because if you realize right from the beginning the complexities of the task, you may not even tackle it, right? But this way, there was an understanding. Yeah, we'll get there together. Then, of course, came World War II, and that put a stop to any other meeting. But then after the war, they reconvened, and they started to invite more and more people. So to this day, average every 5 years, we have an East-West Philosophers Conference. The next one will be in 2020 in May.
Wow.
And we're expecting, like every time, 300, maybe 400 philosophers from around the world. We're very happy to, make sure that we get philosophers not just from the Western world, but also from Asia, from Africa, and it's a great learning experience. So that's the one good thing that happened in Hawaii in 1939.
I know that because I've attended your recent lectures of university that you attended one of these conferences, didn't you?
Yes, I did, a number of them actually. And not only have I attended them, but I'm also part of the committee that organizes them.
Wow.
So for the next one in 2020, I will be one of the co-directors. So yes, and if you want to know the topic will be just wall. Wall.
And that's a very contemporary topic.
Yes.
Considering that U.S. is building one at the Mexico border and Pakistan is building one at Afghanistan border. Not to mention the fact that Nicosia is still divided by one wall, the last capital, European capital, which is still divided. And anyway, how your approach differentiates from this main topic which are present in these conferences? How would you describe it?
I wonder whether people notice in my publications that I'm so different. Until now, I haven't made it explicit, but let me just tell you about the what I think is essential for doing comparative philosophy with some intercultural sensitivity. You see, of course, since 1939, many things happen in the field of comparative philosophy. We are having now, we're witnessing a period in which many publications speak of fusion philosophy.
Sure.
And it's wonderful. I mean, the understanding is that you have a question, you want to solve a problem, and so why not look at concepts that come from different traditions, right? And you fuse them, like in cuisine. And many extraordinary things can happen that way. But I like to caution colleagues who work in this field, whether they explicitly think of fusion or just do it on occasion, because I think there is also an ethical dimension that we need to be aware of. We don't want to just be mining other traditions. We have a long, long history of colonialism, the West colonizing the East. And in a way, just thinking, I'm looking for something different, for something else, and I might find it in an Indian text, or I might get it from a Chinese source. It can be problematic. It is not necessarily problematic, but it can be problematic because you might just take something entirely out of context, and it may do the job that you want it to do, but then is it really a matter of working with different traditions? If you just take out something of its original context without wanting to find out whether it is what whether in that original context it was fulfilling the same function role, right? So that's why for a number of years now I've been thinking of trying something else, and in order to take away what might be a harsh approach, kind of like just grabbing and making it fit, I'm thinking of introducing bricolage into comparative philosophy, and I'm working on a paper that I like to submit to the Philosophy East and West Journal, and hopefully they'll like it and publish it. And so the bricoleur is someone who, yes, starts off as a comparativist. You have to kind of know how to do this, compare the right items, but also pay attention to differences. But in addition, the bricoleur is someone who is sensitive to cultural differences. The bricoleur is not interested in hierarchies. The bricoleur admits that he or she is trying playfully to figure out how to merge concepts that come from different traditions. The bricoleur will say, by the way, I may be taking this from Islamic philosophy, and there the concept is doing this and this, but I see an opportunity how the concept can be adapted, right? And then play a different role. So I'm looking for ethics and honesty, and I think bricolage might just do that.
How about Western tradition? Is it still, do you think that we still can use some Western traditions approaches to implement them in the East or in African studies or in Asian philosophy? Do you think that we still can offer something?
Well, that line of communication never dried out. I've been teaching in China twice. The last time in the summer, in the past summer, and there is such a thirst for philosophical ideas from the West. A colleague there asked me for a list of works that I would consider to be post-1945 classics, because they think they don't have the Chinese translations of such works. And I pointed out that many French philosophical works from the period after World War II really deserve to be taken into consideration. And I just heard the other day that these texts will be translated now in Chinese. And that's just one tiny example. In the Arab world, nobody stopped studying Descartes, Leibniz, Kant, Hegel. I mean, these for non-Europeans and non-Americans are definitely powerful resources. Are they now contributing to Western philosophy? Some are, and others do without maybe being aware of the methodology, which is some sort of comparative philosophy. Are using concepts and thinking of them as something that may help them understand their own societies today, or come up with what might be a better vision of the future, or critically evaluate history, language, literature, curriculum, politics. So Western philosophy has not lost its edge.
So in that case, Professor Albertini, could you tell me how can we in the West develop out of the philosophical developments which are happening in Damascus, in Baghdad, in Tehran? Why are we so blind to these developments which are happening in the intellectual Islam, which you are so much interested in?
That is really something I'm hoping to change eventually. Creating a space in which Islamic philosophy is as vital, as robust as Chinese and Indian and Buddhist and Japanese philosophy, just to mention some of the traditions. It looked like back then in 1939, they really didn't give as much attention to Islamic philosophy. They did have someone from UNESCO come and say a few things, but there was no plan, no program that would give also Islamic philosophy that same kind of importance like the other major Asian traditions. And the problem, I think, was, and still is to a certain extent, that scholars assume Islamic philosophy died out. They think that with the destruction of Baghdad, you mentioned Baghdad, the famous destruction by the hands of the Mongols, when the great library, which was also a scientific center, Dar al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, was just taken apart. So the assumption is that once Baghdad fell and the Sunni empire did not reinvent itself, that was the end of philosophy and sciences in the Islamic world. Big mistake. What actually happened is that the centers of learning shifted. And that's nothing unusual. It used to be that people would go to study philosophy in Athens. There's still people studying philosophy in Athens, but what I'm trying to say, it's not a magnet as it once used to be. Bologna, Oxford, Paris, Sorbonne. I mean, these were major centers of learning, but today they're not as important as they once used to be. So if we can understand that in the West, centers of learning shifted, why can't we do that for the Islamic world? And it seems to be difficult to make that step. As a matter of fact, if you pay attention to another Swiss philosopher for whom I have a great admiration, Elmar Hollenstein, or Hollenstein in German, you'll find out that he has a philosophical atlas that was drawn with the utmost cultural sensitivity. And so you look at his map and what you realize the capital mistake that most scholars in the West still make, which is that they entirely focus on the Mediterranean world. And so, no philosophy anymore, no Islamic philosophy anymore in Spain after 1492, Reconquista, right? No major figures in North Africa. Well, there's, for instance, Ibn Khaldun. Usually people miss this very important figure, but nevertheless. And then they think, all right, so, that was the end of Islamic philosophy. But if you shift east your attention and do what Hollenstein suggests, which is you look at geographic markers. So he says, take as a completely different region the territories between the Nile River and the Amud Darya. Right? And see, he doesn't say Oxus. Most people still say Oxus like the Greeks. He says we have to call that river the way people call it who live there, right? So you look at the Nile and the Amud Darya, and Islamic philosophy and sciences have not vanished. Because you see, that's basically a major territory between Egypt and Central Asia, where yes, Egyptian learning continued, but then also Persian learning continued. You see, the Persians were also occupied, were also invaded by the Mongols, and had basically for a while the same fate like the Arab Empire, the Abbasid Empire, and yet. It looks like the Persians had the intellectual and cultural resources to reinvent themselves after those incursions, and not surprisingly, there was a continuity. Major figures in philosophy and sciences, were making sure that these fields did not remain idle. So just to give you one famous example from a period when Western philosophers think that there was nothing in the East, Mullah Sadra, 17th century philosopher, a giant, a monumental figure, prolific writer, someone who would still use the Greeks but also tap into the Persian schools of thought. So one very, very famous school of thought is called Illuminationism. And it goes partly back to Sohrawardi, a much earlier philosopher who lived about the time of Salah ad-Din, so the famous Saladin. And he critiqued Aristotle and said that epistemology had to be entirely reworked, and he created a philosophy that spoke of knowing through presence. So you see, this was unheard of in Europe for a long time. And here I can just bring in another problem, the way I see it, which is that if a Islamic philosophical text was not translated into Latin during the Middle Ages, well, then it kept not being considered for many more centuries after that. So it took a long time until Western philosophers came to the realization that there was a very rich and complex tradition within Islam that they had entirely ignored. So my point of view is that Islamic philosophy did not vanish. It just relocated, it refashioned itself, it adapted to new circumstances, which is precisely what Western philosophy did too. We are not anymore philosophizing the way the Greeks did, right? We obviously have changed. So why can't we accept that the same is true of the Islamic world?
So basically, Middle East could be considered as a cradle of our Western civilization at one point, but we stopped having so much influences from the Middle East. Can we change that? Can we, if we reach out to the Middle East, to Tehran, to Baghdad, to Damascus, or to Cairo, if we reach out to these philosophers, could we basically find a way to reestablish ourselves in Europe on the philosophical map of the world? And can we somehow benefit the discourse, the quality of the discourse?
What you're touching upon shows that we have a need to always trace something to something that we all do that, right? An idea came, this philosopher and this philosopher owes it to another philosopher who was inspired by another tradition and so forth. And sometimes we can really trace the origin of an idea in this way. But I think it is so much more important if we start to understand that we are all each other's cradles. There is much that Europe owes the Islamic world during the Middle Ages, right? Definitely Arabs and other Muslims have preserved the ancient Greek knowledge, Greco-Roman heritage. And not only have they preserved it, but they have expanded on it. And then it came back to Europe, enriched and allowed European sciences to reinvent themselves. But by the same token, you could say, well, before the Muslims could preserve the Greco-Roman heritage, well, actually they received it from Europe, right? And so what I see is much more important is if we can recognize that major civilizations, especially in the area from Europe till the end of Asia in the East, have always been inspiring each other. And this is what it is. We preserve each other's heritage. We preserve each other's knowledge. There was a time when I was upset to see, let's say, Roman artifacts and artwork at the Getty Museum in Malibu. And I was thinking, why is this not in Italy? Why is it in Malibu? But then I realized, well, you never know what could happen in one place. Cataclysms, major catastrophes, man-made ones, natural ones, who knows? It's always good to have heritage kind of like spread all over the globe. And the same is, of course, true of ideas. We are each other's guardians. This is what I think we all need to learn. It's useless to say, I gave you this idea, and the other one says, yeah, but I gave you another idea. And we could go on endlessly like that, right? We are all giving each other's ideas. Ideas are not really the property of any one nation. And this is something that actually a very famous Muslim philosopher who was born in today's Kazakhstan, his name is Al-Farabi, he lived in the 9th, 10th century, during the Abbasid period. He was in Baghdad, and he had this beautiful idea about the journey of philosophy. And so he did something that we all do, kind of like, where did it start? Where did it start? So he's, it started with the Chaldeans. Think of them as ancient Syrians. And from the Chaldeans it went to Egypt, and from Egypt it went to Athens, and then it came back to Egypt, and then it came to the Arabs, and from there it went to Spain, and then you see. So he had this idea of philosophy always traveling, always circulating. He didn't get everything right. He for instance, mentions Rome and felt Rome was a dead end and nothing original or exciting will ever come out of Europe. He was wrong, but even a genius can be wrong. But essentially, the idea that ideas circulate, that philosophy is always traveling, is something very important. So again, we are all each other's guardians.
That's great. That's a great explanation. Thank you very much for that. Professor Albertini, I want to touch upon the politics a little bit at this point, if you don't mind, because we all see these developments which happened in the Northern Africa and Middle East these days, Arab Spring. It started as a great idea to people who perceived freedom, brotherhood, and equality as something which they deserve, like we in Europe or in different parts of the world. They wanted to be part of this story, just to define these despots who were there. But it somehow went all wrong. How can you explain that person who has such a deep understanding of Islamic world from your perspective? Could you tell me what could be done different, or where we heading, where they are heading?
I'd rather answer by pointing out the one country where I think the Arab Spring was successful, and although it has so many more obstacles to overcome, it seems well equipped, well prepared to continue the journey towards more democracy, greater freedoms, more social rights, and so forth. And that is Tunisia. Now, I might be a little bit biased because I lived once in Tunisia as a child. I went there to school from the age of 4 to 14. That's where I was, and so I have a major intellectual and cultural debt towards Tunisia, where I learned Arabic and was surrounded by the most wonderful people one could think of. Now, why was it possible to do this, in Tunisia? Why was it possible for Tunisia to get rid of their tyrant and not, see him replaced by just a new figure? What really matters at first is to have a highly educated population. Tunisia has the highest percentage of university graduates, of people who finished high school, which in Tunisia means you finish high school with 2 languages. They all learn French and Arabic, and they do it by immersion, which is an extraordinary concept. For instance, history is always taught in Arabic, geography always in French. So you see, children from a very young age don't think of learning French as a foreign language, but just as their second language. This is very, very helpful. Then Tunisia made sure right from the beginning, thanks to the wisdom of their first president, who was also not necessarily a democratic figure, but had many of the good ideas that helps Tunisia to this day. That was Habib Bourguiba. Bourguiba understood that Tunisians should have an identity that really goes far back into the history of North Africa. So all children, I went through that education, all children learn about the Carthaginians and the Romans and the Byzantines and the Vandals, right? And understand, Islam came actually only in the 7th century, so there was all that period before that was very different. And that makes a major difference because Tunisians, for instance, relate to ancient sites. They relate to the Roman mosaics. I could show, for instance, how some of the Roman mosaics are actually reflecting the population of North Africa. So what happened very early on is that the original population got Romanized, and with the Roman education they received, they did not miss the chance to make sure that the figures in their art were representing them. The proportions are not Greco-Roman. Those are the proportions of people from North Africa. So, that would be the second part of my answer. But then the most important part, possibly, is that it all started with this street vendor, Mohammed Bouazizi.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has heard, to some extent, his story, how he had suffered and struggled for many years to create himself an income, and not just for himself, but for his brothers and mother and stepfather. And so he had a lot of family that whom he needed to feed. Are we done?
Oh.
He had a lot of family that needed to be fed. So apparently, one day, the police, who had always been harassing him, confiscated his vegetable cart.
Mm-hmm.
And he had borrowed money that day so that he could buy the vegetables and then resell them at a slightly higher price. So with him not having the cart anymore, he couldn't repay his debts, and he was entirely deprived of any income. And so what he did when he self-immolated is appeal
Mm-hmm.
to the best sentiments of Tunisians. You see, in the meanwhile, there is literature about Bouazizi that says, well, but in a way, yes, he sacrificed himself, but actually he was trying to punish the Tunisian government or the police. And I don't think that's what it was. It was not meant to be a self-sacrifice so that he could punish an institution or other people. It's entirely misunderstanding Tunisian culture. There is a term that's widespread in North Africa. It's called haqra. Haqra is utter contempt. Utter contempt. It means you treat a human being as if that human being were not a person, just a thing. Right? And when he self-immolated with great modesty and integrity, right? He was not thinking of a political act. He did not invoke religion. He did not think of himself being a martyr, a shaheed, right? All he did is express that the political and economical system in Tunisia had deprived him of a way out. There was nothing he could have done to change that. So he understood that the only way how he could save his dignity was to point out that there was only one thing left that was his, and that was his body. And the beauty, I mean, this is actually a sad act, right, and a sad situation, but the beauty is that Tunisians related to that. They understood he is like us. Maybe he was insulted a little bit more. Maybe he was deprived more than some other Tunisians. And what he did is telling all of us that if we wait any longer, living under a dictatorship, we too will end up having no way out. And you see, that act galvanized an entire nation. And you see, it's not something you can repeat. There have been hundreds of other people throughout the Arab world who either did self-immolate, right, set themselves on fire, or attempted, right, to sacrifice themselves the way Bouazizi had done, and yet it did not have that effect. So in the end, you just have to point out there is something in Tunisian society, some cohesion, some glue, right, that made that possible, and that is what gave the Arab Spring, together with the education and the knowledge that they are the heirs of many civilizations, the kind of energy to carry it through. And then, of course, the dictator left, they had elections, and Islamist party came to power, and it looked like there was going to be civil war, right? But you see, it didn't happen, because the leader of the Islamist party is also a very educated person, and he stepped down. He stepped down, and I think the story is well known how 4 Tunisians received the Peace Nobel Prize for their efforts. So you have civil society at its best in Tunisia. You have the leader of labor, the leader of the employers. These people are not usually friends, right? But they got together. The leader of the Lawyers Association and the leader of the Human Rights Organization in Tunisia. These 4 people and many helpers around them, obviously, start to talk to the political parties. And they made sure that everybody understood to leave aside their, grab for power, which is something that, of course, every political party is about, and put the country first. And it is a miracle. And it is a miracle that doesn't happen often, and it doesn't, not only doesn't it happen often in the Arab world, but I would say it doesn't happen often in any part of the world. That is why the Arab Spring in Tunisia succeeded and has a chance. And you see, so much happened since then. Can you imagine? So we are talking now about a country where there is equality between the genders, and that's written into the constitution. The Islamists said complementarity, which sometimes is a way to say the man is complete and the woman needs the man so that she can complete herself, right? So a lot of educated women and men, by the way, stood up and said, no, let's go for equality. Next thing that happens, equality is in the constitution. Men and women are going to inherit the same share. Sharia law says that women do not inherit the same amount of whatever there may be, real estate, cash money, and so forth, like the male relatives, right? So that got changed in the name of equality. Sharia law says that while a Muslim man may marry a non-Muslim woman, a Muslim woman may not do the same by marrying a non-Muslim man, but now they can. So these are extraordinary changes, and of course they're not acceptable to everybody in society. But then again, think about Western countries and how long it took Western countries to bring about change. In the 19th century, a woman in England could not work without her husband's written permission.
And she could not vote.
She could not vote. A woman could
could hardly do anything.
And whatever property she brought into the marriage became her husband's possession, and he would control it. So some people may be cynical and say, yeah, but that happened over 100 years ago. Well, the important thing is that it is happening now.
Professor Albertini, thank you very much for these answers. I have just one last question, if I may. Basically, I'm interested, what's next for Professor Albertini? Could you tell us more about that? What's your plans?
Thank you for that. You see, I'm still in my sabbatical year, which I'm enjoying utterly. So until now, or actually in the next few days, I'll still be a Fulbright scholar, but starting on February 1st, I am entirely free. And I'll be able to finally accept all those open invitations that I used to receive in the past. Because see, living in Hawaii makes it a little bit difficult to go quickly to Egypt, or quickly to Tunisia, or quickly to Lebanon. So now I'm in a position to tell my colleagues, all right, if you're serious, I'm coming. And so actually everything is already lined up. So every month I'll be traveling somewhere else. I'll be offering workshops, meeting colleagues, teaching graduate students, and so forth. So that is a very rewarding matter. And then I'll, in August I'll go back to Hawaii, and I'll be the chair of my department, and I'll have to figure out how I can still save time for my scholarly work. As everyone who is in philosophy knows, writing is very demanding for us. And for me, writing is in itself a philosophical activity, a philosophical process, a philosophical experience. Leonardo da Vinci used to say that he would understand nature by drawing. And there's something very similar happening with philosophers when they write. We philosophers may think that we first have the ideas and then we write them down. We have something, that makes us start to write, but it's really once we, are into the process that we make our own discoveries. So writing is something very delicate, and I think we philosophers are just privileged to have that experience.
And I can say that on behalf of Statu Nascendi readers, that we are very lucky to have you. We are very lucky to have you as an interviewee, and I would like to thank you for your time, and wish you all the best in all your endeavors.
Thank you. This was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.